Saints Row 4. I was never actually planning on making a video about this game, just because all the criticisms I had about Saints Row the Third that I mentioned in my video review of that game, entitled "Why That Game Sucked." Well, basically, every single one of the general criticisms that I had about that game can be applied to this one in some fashion or another, in some way. All those issues exist in this game, basically, that I can remember off the top of my head. And I really wasn't planning on just repeating the same shit that I had said in that video in this video. But a couple of the commenters on that video requested that I do a Saints Row 4 video. I really don't want to make it, in depth that much, but whatever. Just as a brief background history, I guess, with my history of Saints Row, in case you didn't see the previous video. I enjoyed the first Saints Row game. It was unique. I thought it had potential. I know it was criticized heavily as being a GTA knockoff, but it showed potential. I thought the characters were funny and interesting. The story itself was entertaining to play through. I liked the gameplay. I didn't like the respect system in that you have to earn respect in order to go to the next mission. But aside from that, everything was, it showed potential. Is basically like San Andreas, which I enjoyed. I just liked the side activities were plentiful and good. It was just a very good, solid game. It had some glitches to it and everything like that, but it was a solid 8.5 or 9 out of 10 game. I thought the multiplayer was tacked on. But yeah, not too many criticisms about that game. And Saints Row 2, I thought was the best sandbox game on the Xbox 360. Of course, that might change now that San Andreas has been re-released for it. But the best original game for the original sandbox game that was originally released for the 360. Even better than GTA 4 and even GTA 5, which I consider probably the second or third best or so, up there, whatever. The game was innovative to me because it basically that game, along with any other good sequel like Left 4 Dead 2 and Assassin's Creed 2 and Gears of War 2 and Gears of War 3, of course. But basically, that's Saints Row 2 was an exemplary game in terms of being a great sequel to an already great game. And how it was a great sequel was that it expanded and improved upon any of the combat problems of the first game, and it expanded and made the combat more diverse, gave you more weapons, it gave you more stuff to do. It expanded the city, and most of all was just the level of customization that was at your disposal in that game was trumped basically any other game that I could think of. Even to this date, I can't think of any game that allows you that level of character customization in terms of what your character looks like, as well as just the level of clothing variety that you can buy in that game. That game was a solid 10 out of 10. The first Saints Row game was like a 9 out of 10. The third Saints Row game, Saints Row the Third, was more like, well, I should say that the game itself is more like a 7.5 out of 10 without looking at those previous two games, because that game was basically, as is this one, Saints Row in name only. Really, the first two games were really just the only Saints Row games here, and these games should just really be titled something else, because they're just completely different in tone, in themes, and in the characters, and just everything. Saints Row the Third basically just cut out a lot of the customization options from the first game. It failed to improve on anything except for a few combat things to me. I listed some of the improvements really, but that's really what it came down to, was just the combat was improved. Everything else from the lack of a good story. Basically, that game had no real good story to it at all. There were no new characters that they introduced, just caricatures. The humor was crude and sexually crude and just forced during practically every line. The game was shorter than Saints Row 2, lacked as much content, the city wasn't as interesting to explore, can't replay missions or cutscenes, the list goes on and on. Just watch my other video of it. And I'm sure if you played the game, you'll know why it's worse than Saints Row the Third. I hope. This game, well, I don't know. I don't even know where to begin with this mess. But I guess I should start off with some of the positives or whatever, but let me go off with my history of this game. I beat this game at launch. I told you in my previous video review that I would boycott this game, and I did. But I received the game as a Christmas present during the year Christmas 2013, which I believe was the year that this came out in. And I didn't really feel like returning the game, so I gave it a shot and beat it, and didn't really think much of it. And my best friend is also a big Saints Row fan of the first two games, and he actually returned the game to get GTA 5. He literally got maybe 2 or 3 hours into this game before giving up on it, and yeah, and I managed to stick through it. Just for some setup, originally I believe this game was supposed to be a DLC. That's right. It's basically the original concept for this game was just a DLC by the developers, and they just decided to expand it and put a $60 price tag on it. And that's just what it feels like. It's a glorified expansion, or a hefty expansion, but an expansion at that, to Saints Row the Third. And really it was not even an expansion to the game. It was really just them expanding I think it was the GAT DLC or whatever the hell it was, from one of the 2 or 3 DLCs available for Saints Row the Third featured or allowed your character rather to super sprint really quickly and have some other superpowers, I guess. I can't remember, but basically this whole game is just basically playing that DLC. And just except 10 times longer than that, or several times longer than it. And that's just what the whole game feels like. The difference here being is that you have superpowers in the game. You have like super jump, super sprinting, and fire, ice abilities, telekinesis, a bunch of other kind of shit in the game. As you can see in the start of this game, you're sort of playing on a Black Ops covert mission here to take out some random terrorists, and to be honest, it doesn't even matter. This entire level that you're seeing here in this footage can be summed up as a tutorial level, but even then it fails because you don't use any superpowers here, so really it's not indicative of how you're going to be playing the rest of this game at all. So essentially it's pointless. The story doesn't carry over in this mission, and nothing is, basically this entire mission should be skippable. It's just a bunch of fluff. It's filler. It doesn't matter. But anyways, so the story in this game is you're playing the president of the United States, and some aliens attack. And once again, like in Saints Row the Third, there's a bunch of humor in this that happens to be forced. Now, I think the humor in some instances is a bit stepped up here in the previous game. In Saints Row the Third, the humor was sexually crude, whereas here it's just mostly crass and kind of goofy and silly. As my character, I created Jason Statham from an online guide and put the British voice on there. And I don't know if the dialogue is any different when you're choosing the third option for getting a British voice for him, but I guess the voice actor there is a lot funnier than the American voice actor who's playing this. I don't know what it is. The inflection in his voice is a lot more humorous, so I did manage to laugh a couple more times throughout this game than I did with Saints Row the Third. Because I guess it wasn't trying as hard in some instances. I guess it reveled a bit more in its stupidity compared to Saints Row the Third. But regardless, I found most of the humor here still to be, forced. Like, a lot of it still was forced. It's a slight step up from Saints Row the Third, but not by much. Now, with your character being the President of the United States, I have no idea why the writers decided to make this option, because it really has no impact on the game. There's no particular perks of being the President of the United States. It's just kind of like during one mission, during the second opening mission here, is where it has any real relevance. But even then, there's no special perks, there's no attributes to your character, there's no real impact or importance of being the President of the United States, in terms of the story, in terms of the gameplay, in terms of really anything aside from this opening first couple of cutscenes, which is, 20 minutes or so of a 15-hour game. It's just such a wasted opportunity. I can't come up with any ideas off the top of my head, but I feel as if they probably could have made some more unique opportunities or ideas with the principle of you being the president.
Take this moment as an example. The game allows you the choice between two different options similar to that of an RPG, but it doesn't account for anything. It's just a stylistic thing. It just, affects maybe a few lines of dialogue at most. In this case, not even that. Anyways, a little bit later on in this very same mission, we get introduced to the main antagonist of the game named Zinyak, or Zimyak, I can't even remember, of the Zin Empire. Zin or whatever. Anyway, I guess this is another positive aspect of the story in this game, at least compared to the Saints Row the Third, in the sense that he's a charismatic presence on the screen. Whoever the voice actor did for him did a good job voicing him. He's a better villain, I would say, just by default compared to Killbane from the other game. I think he's a better character than he is a villain, though, unfortunately. I mean, right here in this mission, you get like a boss battle slash quick time fest right here, button prompts and everything like that. It's cool and fun to watch and play through, but unfortunately, it sort of makes Zinyak appear less threatening when he's getting the shit beat out of him, and he only really beats you by cheating and using his teleportation device. Even so, it was still fun to watch this. But unfortunately, throughout the rest of the game, he sort of disappears. You never really encounter him face to face hardly throughout the game until the very end, and thus your interactions with him are limited. Basically, your sole interaction with him is just through voiceover dialogue across, while you're doing some other shit on the screen, and he's not really present in any of the cutscenes in the game until close to the end of the game. Other elements of the story include the destruction of Earth, and thus including the deaths of these two characters, Oleg and Knight, whatever the fuck this guy's name is. Anyway, both of these events, or rather just this one event, just feels sort of inconsequential since you're not even, the story of this game is just occurring inside this alien spaceship. It's just happening solely within there. So this entire event almost, feels inconsequential, even though by default it should be a very grave event, but I don't know, for some reason it just didn't have that much of a hard impact. Just because the story doesn't take itself seriously in even the most remote sense. But I don't know, it just felt lacking to me. Last real thing I'll mention about the story in this game, this man. I don't have any recorded footage of it in this game because I haven't progressed that far on the Xbox One version of it yet. But he returns in this game, Johnny Gat, my main man, and you remember how pissed off I was about his apparent death in the previous game. Well, he's back, and it's damn satisfying to see him back, and that's probably the highlight of the entire story of this game, is just to play the mission where he's coming back and just to, basically the game, got better once he got back into this game, but unfortunately that was over 2/3 into this game, so you really only had 2 or 3 or so hours left in this game while he was in it. So, yeah, and the ending of this game, just very briefly, it was just kind of silly. I don't know. It felt very, very, very lighthearted. And, you see the villain apparently survived and everyone's kind of like doing a dance off or something. I don't know. It felt kind of just silly and cliched to me. But enough with story. Moving on to gameplay. The actual gunplay itself in this game is practically unaltered from Saints Row the Third. I'm not talking about the powers yet, of course. Aside from the quantity of enemies on screen at once, it seems as if they've doubled the amount of enemies that are shooting at you at one time in this game. And during certain sequences, like this hallway fight right here, the absence of a cover system is just kind of off-putting. I almost felt like it's necessary just based on how many people are shooting at you. It almost feels like kind of, archaic or primitive in a sense in this. Just based on how many guys are shooting at you at once, and just based on the setup of the game, it felt like they could have had some sort of cover system in this game that it implemented. Especially since there's modern missions, or where you're in the spaceship or whatever, kind of shooting around, where there's pieces of cover that theoretically you'd want to use. The only piece of cover system you could, I guess, use is when you crouch down behind cover, but that's really about it. This footage right here is a prime example of the humor in this game failing to appeal to me. Now, with Zimyak taking over Earth, you're placed into a simulation akin to into the Matrix, kind of. So the game's essentially ripping the plot line off from there, as well as the gameplay style of Mass Effect. of the Mass Effect trilogy in terms of being on a spaceship outside of it, but mostly the Matrix. Regardless, this humor here is just kind of like forced and over the top. I mean, I don't even know how you're supposed to react to this. This in fact, right here with this old-fashioned garbage right here, while you're in this simulated world during this particular mission, is I think where my friend clocked out. It was just too much. It's too overbearing, and it just I don't know. It's just so I don't know, stupid. I mean, I guess that's just the word I would want to say. Asinine, stupid. Just, unfunny garbage. That's just what I would say to this mission. It's just absurd crap. That, it's not sexually crude like the other games. It's not like for shock value per se in terms of there being some really retarded shit like those giant guys that are in underwear like in the third game. But this is just kind of like, I don't know, just odd, queer, stupid shit that just, yeah, I don't know, it just doesn't appeal to me. But whatever, in terms of the mission design, I mean, it's mostly the same as the third game. It's just mainly a variation of just guarding something for a couple minutes or just taking out specific targets. Alrighty, well, the powers in this game. The powers. Well, I'll admit it is kind of fun to go around and fly around in this city. I mean, it basically feels like you're playing a prototype or, one of the Spider-Man games. Swinging around and gliding around and shit. And it is kind of fun, although I think the movement in terms of you jumping, in terms of like in terms of gauging how far you want to jump, how strong your jump is, it's kind of hard. It's either I don't know, it's hard to gauge. It's either like you jump very lightly, or you have to jump, you have to hold it down all the way and do like your super max jump. Anything in between that, like the A button doesn't really gauge it, so it really just chooses either one. Where really you wanted to go like in between, and it doesn't really work that well. I mean, sometimes it goes in between, but it's hard to gauge that. It's hard to measure just how high you're gonna jump when you want to press it like in the middle, whatever. And sometimes it's difficult to like, I don't know. It feels like you're kind of moving slowly when you're when you leap very high, and then it's kind of like jump when you're descending down through the air. It's kind of hard to target, or I guess you could say it's imprecise, like the jumping mechanics. It's imprecise in terms of targeting where you want to land. The biggest impact that these abilities really have throughout the game is just affecting the speed of transportation, of moving about the world. Once you upgrade your super sprint and super jump, that you're basically going to be able to move faster than even the fastest sports cars in the game, so there's not going to be any real use for jumping in a car anymore and driving around. And that's really all it boils down to. Yeah, I mean, all the other more offensive abilities, like fire attacks and ice attacks and stuff like that, those are more tertiary, or supplementary rather. They're kind of like the abilities in BioShock, for example. They're there, but you still have to, for the most part, rely on your guns to take down your enemies, and it really doesn't actually have that much. To me, at least, based on how I've been playing the game so far, it doesn't have that much of an impact on fighting enemies as much. I mean, the movement does and everything, jumping high and retreating to regenerate your health or whatever, or something like that. Speaking of regenerating health, to my knowledge so far, I think they took away that feature, and now you have to kill enemies which drop health packs or whatever, or health, circles that replenish your health partially. Why they took away regenerating health? Fuck only knows. No idea why they took that out. But yeah, the actual powers leave a lot to be desired, like the telekinesis and all this other stuff. I mean, they become moderately useful once you've upgraded them fully. But yeah, that's about it. Now I just want to list off some of the negative features of this game that are more specific to this game. First of all, sprinting in this game, you have to hold down the left bumper. I believe that was it for the same button for the Xbox 360 version of this game, and probably for Saints Row the Third as well. But because this footage here is for the new revamped version, the Xbox One version of the game. And sprinting with the left bumper on the Xbox One controller just sucks. And, I don't want to really blame the game fully for this. I mean, I just think the bumpers on the Xbox One controller just suck in general compared to the ones on the 360. But it's difficult to really hold it down for that long, for long continuous periods of time. I mean, it's okay if you're holding it down for a second or two when you're gonna like take down an enemy by rushing up to him. But when you actually have to like rush during the race challenges when you're sprinting around and stuff, it just kind of gets annoying. It's not ergonomically friendly. And I'll get back on the races. In terms of the graphics, there's basically no graphical improvement on the Xbox One version of the game compared to the Xbox 360. I'm not really one who's big on graphics anymore. I used to be, but I don't really care as much. But really, this is probably one of the worst looking Xbox One titles out there. That's actually like a full game and not like an indie game or whatever. So they really had no improvements there. The performance, I've had some slowdowns. I've had plenty of glitches in the game as well. So there's that. So really, you're not really going to be getting much of a benefit of getting the Xbox One version over the Xbox 360. There's not any graphical increase or improvement as far as I can remember, as far as I can tell, and the performance is not really that great anyway. Anyway, this whole game, like I said before, I believe, was originally fleshed out to be just a DLC to Saints Row the Third, and they basically just expanded upon that here. So the whole game feels just like an overpriced DLC. I mean, the game isn't very long. It'll take you maybe 12 hours or so to beat the game at most. There's not really a whole lot of replay value, especially since you can't replay cutscenes or missions just like you couldn't in Saints Row the Third. I don't want to repeat myself too much here. But yeah, that's just basically about it. They rehashed the same city as Saints Row the Third. I mean, they added some alien spaceships and alien architecture here and there. And for whatever reason, they decided that there's no day-night cycle. It's always going to be at night. I know if you beat the game, you can have the option to change that in the menu or whatever. But throughout the entire game, it's just going to be pitch black, at night, and it just becomes visually dull on your eye. It just becomes dull and tiresome to look at, for so long without any type of, environmental variety like that. If you know what I'm talking about, it's not that big of an issue, but it's just lazy to me. Especially with being the same city, it's just dull. Any sense of exploration, like there should be in sandbox games, was limited in Saints Row the Third because the city itself was not nearly as interesting in and of itself compared to Stillwater from Saints Row, the first one, and especially Saints Row 2. But here, there's no exploration whatsoever unless you haven't played Saints Row the Third. There's no exploration in this game at all. No multiplayer in this game. Now, again, and that's another issue I mentioned in my previous video. I didn't really play the multiplayer in either of the previous two Saints Row games, but I know a lot of people did that and they enjoyed it quite a bit. So why they would take out something that people enjoyed before and that would add more content to the game, fuck them. And there, no improvement really to the customization in clothing or crafting the character. Basically, they have, as far as I can tell, they have the same insults, they have the same voices, they have this, the insults and praises or whatever, like the gestures that you make. They're basically all the same type of clothing or whatever that's available in this game compared to the Saints Row the Third. There's not really any expansion there. There's no expanded hair options or anything like that, as far as I can remember, or anything like that in terms of physically building your character. And of course, for whatever reason, the character create system, whatever, is randomized in terms of how complex the number scale is or whatever in terms of when you're crafting something. For some reason, it could, for some bars, it could go from 1 to 100, including every single number. Some of them go by 2s, some of them go by 5s, and some of them go by 10s. And it's just all completely arbitrary to me. Like, it makes no sense. Like, you might have them go by, each individual number for 5 columns in a row, and then all of a sudden, just, they go by 10s or whatever. It's just very weird, and, limits your creative options, your creative potential when you hamper or limit the customizable options for creating your character. It's stupid. And I don't know. Like I said before, this game is still very silly to me. I mean, it doesn't have the crude sexual humor that the third Saints Row game has, and in some instances, the humor isn't quite as forced. I mean, some of it kind of is more self-aware than Saints Row the Third was in a sense, in terms of how stupid it is. But even then, I think they still try too hard to force the humor on you. That's just kind of stupid and juvenile and a bit crass for my taste. And I just hate how people are saying that they're doing this because they want Saints Row to be so much different compared to the Grand Theft Auto series. Well, my counter argument would be just to have them, be a competition, a competitor to the Grand Theft Auto series, because then it makes them, it pushes them to be better. It makes them strive to make better games. The more competition you bring in the same genre, the higher quality it's going to be between the games that are shelled out to the consumers. You know, because there's more competition, and there's going to be competition in terms of people are usually, some of them are only going to be wanting to buy one of the two games, and it puts more pressure on them. If Grand Theft Auto, that series, and I'm not saying it's bad, I think they're great games. If they're the only ones, then that doesn't really give them much of an incentive to make better games when they know that everyone's going to buy them anyway, when they have limited options within the same genre, if you know what I mean. Because personally, in my opinion, and I know several people who agree with me, Saints Row 2, in my opinion, Saints Row 2 was better than both Grand Theft Auto 4 and 5. It had more content to it, overall more customizability or customizable options, a more interesting city to explore, in my opinion, and just more variety to the gameplay. I know a lot of people don't agree because it's not like, the budget wasn't as high, the graphics weren't as good. In some respects, the voice acting and the story weren't quite as deep as Grand Theft Auto didn't have the deep themes as Grand Theft Auto in certain respects. But I thought it was better than both of those games in many, many respects overall. And it gave Grand Theft Auto 4 a run for its money in being like the game of the year. And unfortunately, I can't say the same for either of these last two Saints Row games. There's really not a whole lot more for me to say about this game like I said before, that I haven't said in Saints Row the Third. Basically, these last two games, and especially this game, are really Saints Row in name only. Especially with this game changing up the game style a bit in terms of how you're moving about the world and everything. Like the power sort of altered quite a bit in terms of how you're the transportation and everything like that. You just play it differently. But if you look past that, if you don't consider this a Saints Row game and just on its own merits, I still don't think it's worth $60. I think it's probably worth checking out for $20 at most, or under that, because it is a short game with no real replay value to it. I don't think it's a bad game, and I don't think Saints Row the Third is a bad game. On their own merits, on their own terms. Just looking at the game by itself without comparing to the previous game or the previous games. But it stands on its own 2 feet as like a decent game. I'm not gonna bash it too hard on that. It can be enjoyable, but I like to think of it because it doesn't work like that to me. They should, because they have, you can't just base each game on their own. In my opinion, you can do that, but when it's part of a series, you like to look at how things have evolved. What they've improved upon from the previous game. Like if you're looking, to consider this as just solely a standalone game would be to pretend as if the previous 2 or 3 games hadn't existed. And really, the bottom line is that this game is just completely fucking lazy. It's fun to play at certain parts. I'm not going to deny that. It has enjoyable moments to the game. I think there's a lot of problems with it. There's a lot of problems with it that I'm not going to bother even mentioning in this, that my Saints Row the Third review or rant covered perfectly well. But it has enjoyable moments to the game. It's enjoyable throughout, I think. I understand why people would enjoy this game, and hell, I enjoyed parts of the game. I'm not going to lie, I didn't hate every single moment of the game, but I'm not going to deny that this is, technically still a part of the Saints Row series, and thus I have to judge it based on the previous games, and this game is just fucking lazy. They rehashed everything in this game. They didn't really expand or improve jack shit. They added the powers, which really don't make that much of a difference in the core game, to be perfectly honest, but, whatever. Basically, I'd recommend the game on its own if you haven't played any of the other Saints Row games before. It's fine. It works. It's functional. There's not anything terrible about the game in terms of, there being anything broken mechanically or anything like that. But yes, this is not a Saints Row game at all, and so yeah, there's nothing I have more to say about the game. I have the Gat Out of Hell game, which I guess since this is a glorified DLC, this game is essentially an expansion of a DLC of the third Saints Row game. So Gat Out of Hell, even though it's a standalone game, is I guess a DLC of the DLC of the DLC of Saints Row the Third. Oh, fuck me. I'm gonna review that game. I'm gonna play through it and give you my honest opinion of that game. I doubt it'll be favorable, but whatever. So yeah, that's my 2 cents about this game. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was in depth enough for you. But yeah, peace out, guys, and I'll tell you what I think about the Gat Out of Hell DLC once I complete it.